The first time I held my son, Daniel, in my arms was the moment I tasted both ecstasy and fear all at once. I was 19, fresh out of Elmwood High with nothing more than a scratched leather backpack slung over my shoulder and a head full of dreams I barely knew how to chase. His mother, Amelia, and I had fallen into an unexpected romance one sweltering summer afternoon when we were both too young and too hopeful. But love, as I soon discovered, is delicate and changeable, a candle flickering in the wind easily snuffed by disagreements and misunderstandings. By the time Daniel was 8 months old, Amelia had moved back to her parents' house 2 towns over, leaving me with our son and a stack of half-finished dreams. The first few nights alone were agonizing. With his cries echoing in the tiny living room, I scoured the apartment for anything that might soothe him. I tried swaddling him tighter, humming lullabies Amelia used to sing, rocking him in the threadbare armchair we'd inherited from my grandfather. Nothing worked. Every ounce of warmth in the room seemed to seep out through the cracked window pane, and I, clutching Daniel close, had no idea how to fix it. I felt helpless, like a ship caught in a tempest with no lighthouse in sight. Soon after, reality made itself unbearably clear. I needed money. Fast. I took the bus into town each morning and lined up at the diner on Main Street, where I scrubbed floors before dawn, flipped pancakes till my back ached, and served steaming coffee to bleary-eyed regulars. Afternoons found me delivering newspapers on my rusty bicycle, the wind stinging my cheeks as I pedaled through gridlocked streets. At night, I cleaned offices in high-rise buildings, emptying wastebaskets, dusting cubicles, and listening to the distant hum of fluorescent lights long after the last employee had left. Each job paid barely enough to keep us afloat, but I couldn't stop. Every dollar was a lifeline. Daniel adapted in his own quiet way. He was a remarkably resilient baby, his mouth curved into a smile whenever he spotted something new, and he babbled as if he were speaking secrets of the universe. But children are brutally honest observers. They register lack as keenly as they do abundance. One afternoon, I strapped him into the stroller and wheeled him past a row of gleaming cars parked outside a suburban home. The cars were immaculate, one metallic blue, one bright red, and the driveway led to a gleaming garage door. I glanced down at Daniel, expecting curiosity, but instead saw amusement. His tiny lips curled into a chuckle, and before I could blink, a peal of laughter bubbled out, pure and unguarded. "Dad, why's your shirt all gray?" he seemed to say with his grin. "Look at those big cars. Yours is rusty." I felt the sting of embarrassment sharper than any slap. I forced a smile, pretending the moment didn't fracture my heart, and steered the stroller away that night. After Daniel finally drifted to sleep, I sat at the rickety kitchen table, its surface scarred by years of hasty breakfasts and textbook scribbles, and let the silence press in. The lamplight cast long shadows, and I traced each crack in the formica, as if mapping the fractures in my own life. I had always believed that hard work alone could fix anything. But in that moment, I realized my work wasn't enough. The world was moving faster than I could pedal, and I was in danger of losing my son's faith in me. I pulled a sheet of notebook paper toward me and wrote in shaky ink, Plan A, get a steady job. Plan B, go back to school. Plan C, buy a house one day. The words felt both naive and powerful. They were my promise to Daniel and to myself, a vow that poverty would never define him. Weeks later, I applied for an entry-level position at Meridian Technologies, a small accounting firm not far from downtown. I had no formal credentials, but I was relentless. I showed up in a pressed shirt I'd borrowed from my uncle, my palms clammy, and I introduced myself to the receptionist with a voice steadier than I felt. Every day for 2 weeks, I returned with a cleaner shirt, a firmer handshake, and new examples of how my odd jobs had honed skills: attention to detail from cleaning offices, time management from newspaper routes, customer service from the diner. On the 13th day, the hiring manager, Mr. Alvarez, peeked over his cubicle wall and said, "You're persistent, kid. Come back Monday." When I told Daniel I had a real job, he tilted his head in curiosity. "Will we eat pancakes every day now?" he asked. I ruffled his hair and promised that pancakes would always be on our menu, even if I had to work 2 jobs to pay for them. My time at Meridian was baptism by fire. I learned to reconcile ledgers, process invoices, and navigate corporate software that felt like another language. But each evening, I sent off credit card payments, paid rent, and tucked Daniel into bed with homemade storybooks, tales I scribbled myself, starring him as a fearless explorer. He'd giggle at the illustrations I drew, him wielding a wooden sword, scaling imaginary mountains. Those moments were my sanctuary, where money didn't matter and love was the only currency. Amelia reappeared when Daniel was 3. She came back into our lives quietly, dropping by on weekends with cookies in hand. We coexisted with the easy tension of two people who once loved each other but now played co-parents in separate acts. Daniel reveled in having both of us, though. Sometimes his laughter at my worn shoes and faded shirt returned. I never blamed him. How could a child understand the details of dormant dreams and beleaguered bank balances? By 5, Daniel was asking innocent questions about our traditions. "Why don't we have a Christmas tree every year like my friend Jacob?" he once whispered as he studied the single strand of lights on our wall. I knelt beside him, my heart heavy with humility, and explained that traditions could be built on anything, even pancakes and stories. That year, I spent my meager savings on enough tinsel and ornaments to crown our little living room. We danced around that tree to a crackling radio, and for one perfect evening, Daniel's laughter was light and full of wonder, not edged with pity, through it all. The memory of his laughter on that sunny afternoon, mocking our worn-out stroller, never left me. Instead, it became fuel. Every promotion I earned felt like a step away from that day. Every client I impressed was a brick laid in the house I vowed to build for him. I didn't just want to provide, I wanted to over-deliver, to prove that a humble beginning could lead to something extraordinary. Years would pass before Daniel's laughter settled into a warm, affectionate melody rather than a barbed reminder of our past. But from the very start, in that cramped apartment and on those early morning newspaper routes, I learned the humility of necessity and the fierce joy of a father's hope. And in that space, I planted the seeds of a promise that someday, my son would look at me not with laughter at my lack, but with pride at all I had become for him. When Daniel turned 4, I realized that stability would not fall into my lap. I had to climb for it, one painful foothold at a time. I enrolled in evening classes at the community college 2 towns over, cramming into windowless classrooms after 14-hour workdays. By Monday morning, my eyes burned from the midnight readings. By Friday, I staggered through presentations while clutching half-cold coffee. Still, every formula learned and every balance sheet reconciled felt like progress upward on a sheer cliff face. First steps, balancing books and bills. I signed up for introduction to accounting the same week I accepted a third-shift cleaning gig at the hospital. My hands wiped dusty corridors until the antiseptic scent clung to my skin, and then I dashed to class, lecture notes spilling from my backpack. Professors eyed my threadbare shoes and the grease-stained cuffs of my shirt, yet I answered every question, submitted every assignment on time, and earned a tentative respect. Meanwhile, Daniel spent those evenings with his grandmother, who indulged his sugar cravings and let him stay up late watching cartoons. I felt guilty leaving him, but whispered assurances built on hope. Someday soon, Dad's going to make this all worth it. Setbacks and stepping stones. Midway through my first semester, the furnace in our rented apartment conked out during a January cold snap. With the landlord unresponsive, I melted snow on the stovetop to bathe Daniel, rocking him under layers of blankets so he wouldn't shiver. My grades dipped as exhaustion set in, and a failed midterm threatened to derail my scholarship prospects. At my lowest point, I considered quitting school altogether. Why stretch myself thin when survival itself felt like an achievement? But the memory of Daniel's laughter at our broken stroller and the crushing shame in his eyes spurred me onward. I petitioned for additional tutoring, worked extra shifts, and when the grades came back, I'd clawed my way from the brink of academic probation to an honor roll, earning my stripes by 27. My resume read like a highlight reel of perseverance: an associate's degree in accounting, promotion to office assistant at Meridian Technologies, and dozens of glowing client testimonials. I still took on freelance bookkeeping projects on weekends. Small businesses who couldn't afford bigger firms welcomed my bargain rates, and I welcomed the extra income. Those clients became allies, referring friends and neighbors, and soon I had more work than I could juggle alone. I hired a part-time assistant, giving her the same breaks I had once begged for, while I mentored her through her first spreadsheet. Reconciliations. In doing so, I felt the weight of my own journey reflected back, how far I'd come from the squeaky clean cubicles and disinfected hospital floors. Late nights and lost milestones. Success, however, demanded more than time, it demanded sacrifice. I watched birthdays through dusty office windows, and Daniel's milestones, first bicycle ride, piano recital, high school graduation, often saw me dialing in from the car, parking outside the auditorium, listening through the crack of the passenger door. "I'm proud of you, buddy," I said over the phone one June afternoon, as he lifted his diploma in a cap and gown. His smile crackled through the speaker, but his voice carried a quiet ache. "Wish you were here, Dad." I swallowed hard, promising that this was the last stretch, that soon I'd arrange my schedule so he could always count on me at his side. A new horizon. That promise crystallized when I signed the papers to become a certified public accountant. At 30. The ceremony was modest, a rented conference room, a few balloons, colleagues offering handshakes and backslaps, but when I walked out clutching my license, I felt the ground shift beneath me. For the first time, the path ahead seemed less like an impossible cliff and more like a gentle slope rising toward opportunity. I opened my own consultancy the following month, trading the fluorescent-lit cubicle for a small office with a view of the city skyline. And there, framed on my desk, was a photograph of Daniel at age 4, grinning beside my battered bicycle, the silent testament to how far we'd both traveled. As dawn broke over that cityscape, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The relentless nights, the frozen apartments, the uncountable sacrifices, they had all been necessary rungs on the ladder. I knew the climb wasn't over, the villa of my dreams still lay ahead. But the jagged cliffs that once threatened to swallow us were now etched with footholds, each one marked by grit, sacrifice, and a father's stubborn love for his son. And with every sunrise, I stepped forward, determined that our future would be built on the bedrock of these hard-won victories. By the time I reached 40, I had built my own consultancy from the ground up, a modest office on 9th Avenue with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning light just so. Clients ranged from fledgling startups scrambling for funds to regional manufacturers needing a steadier hand on their ledgers. Each paycheck, each retainer, I funneled into one account, home. The word itself had once felt like a foreign language, something other people took for granted. Now it echoed like a promise. Someday, Daniel and I would leave behind cramped apartments, tireless commutes, and the restless nights that came with never knowing where we might land next. I'd toyed with condos in the city and townhouses in the suburbs, but my heart clung to something older, more storied, an Italianate villa set among olive groves and cypress trees, where the sun would melt the terracotta roofs into living embers at dusk. I pictured Daniel as a boy learning to swim in a private pool. I pictured Sunday lunches shaded by vines dripping grapes. I pictured writing my memoir at a wrought iron table on a balcony overlooking vineyards that stretched to the horizon. To anyone else, it was whimsy. To me, it was salvation. For 2 years, I spent every Saturday at open houses and property auctions. I rolled through winding country roads in my aging sedan, GPS chanting directions I barely heard over my own excitement. In one village, I found a crumbling estate whose floors sagged and whose windows stared blank as moonlit eyes. The price was low, too low, but when I peeked inside, I saw potential: original beams thick with age, a grand fireplace hidden behind plaster, a courtyard ringed by stone benches. I imagined laborers clearing ivy from the facade, painters laying on coats of whitewash, and me, standing back with a cup of coffee, feeling every sacrifice worth it in that first glint of sunlight on a restored wall. Daniel came along on most of these excursions. At first, he indulged me. He'd scroll through his phone in the back seat, headphones on, or hum under his breath as I rattled off historical tidbits I'd picked up reading renovation blogs. But gradually, curiosity crept into his posture. 1. Damp November afternoon, we climbed over waist-high grass at a property perched atop a hill. The rain had left large puddles in the courtyard, and moss slithered up the stones like living veins. Daniel paused at the threshold of the main hall, shivering, and said, "Dad, this place is massive. What would I do here?" I touched his shoulder. "You'd make it yours," I said. "Imagine setting up your easel in that corner window. Or reading by that fireplace, once we fix it." He looked from the broken hearth To my smiling face and, ever so slightly, his eyes lit with the faintest spark. After months of rounds and resets, the villa I'd been searching for appeared on the market just as spring began to stir. It was a 100-year-old farmhouse converted in the 1950s to an Italianate villa, arched windows, a low-pitched roof, and a walled garden that housed olive trees older than my grandparents. The asking price was steep, but the listing notes said the owners wanted a quick sale, and I sensed an opening. I made an offer as soon as I walked through the door, a respectful 5% below asking, but with no contingencies on inspections or mortgage approvals. The next morning, they accepted. I remember sitting in my car, heart pounding so hard my ribcage felt alive, as I sent Daniel a text, "We did it. Villa is ours." The weeks that followed were a blur of blueprints and builder meetings. Inside, the villa was hollowed by neglect, plaster crumbled along the walls, floorboards bowed underfoot, and the garden was a tangle of weeds and thorny vines. But I saw beyond. I saw smooth tile-lacked walls in the bathrooms, exposed beam ceilings in the bedrooms, and a kitchen alive with laughter when we hosted our first family dinner. I hired a local mason to repoint the stonework, a carpenter to refinish the oak floors, and an architect to restore the original arched loggia overlooking the valley below. Each invoice and every inspection reminded me of the years I'd spent working triple shifts, the night classes, the scraped knees from peddling newspapers. Everything had led to this moment. Daniel arrived for our first weekend on site with a duffel slung over his shoulder, eyes narrowed against the midday sun. I gave him a grand tour, the vaulted gallery, the small chapel I planned to convert into a music room, and the garden where I envisioned planting lavender and rosemary. He turned to me in the overgrown courtyard and asked, "Dad, are you really going to live out here?" I chuckled. "I plan to," I said. "But more than that, I plan for this to be a home for you, for all of us." He shrugged, half teasing, half tender. "Old houses are work, Dad." I placed a hand on his arm. "The best things usually are." By midsummer, the restoration was complete. I stood on the terrace at dawn, watching mist rise from the olive groves like silver smoke. The villa gleamed, its ochre walls warmed by the sun, shutters painted deep green, and bougainvillea climbing beside the entryway in hot pink cascades. Inside, every tile was laid with care, every beam sanded and sealed. I opened the wrought iron gate and walked along the stone path to the fountain at the center of the courtyard. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of rosemary and sun-baked stone. All the hardship, all the lonely nights, every early morning, every one of them had been a step toward this place. That evening, I hosted Daniel and Amelia for our first dinner in the villa. We sat under festoon lights strung between olive trees, and I served pasta tossed with fresh tomatoes from the garden. Daniel raised his glass, a simple one, but mine, and said, "To the villa." I met his eyes and saw something I'd never seen before, not pity, not bemusement, but genuine pride. My son believed in this dream just as much as I did. And as candles flickered across his face, I knew that the villa was more than a house. It was the living proof that a promise made on weary knees at a kitchen table could transform our world. The climb had brought us here, and the view was worth every breath. The morning we moved into the villa, a golden sun filtered through the cypress trees, gilding the ochre walls as if celebrating our arrival. I stood at the threshold, suitcase in one hand, keys glinting in the other, and felt my chest expand with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. Behind me, the hired movers stacked boxes in the grand entrance hall, china plates wrapped in newspaper, my grandfather's tarnished silver candlesticks, and the dozens of photo albums I'd amassed over the years, each one a testament to every step of our climb. Daniel arrived in mid-afternoon. He strode down the long gravel drive, hands in the pockets of his jeans, his gaze fixed on the ground until he stood before me. "It's big," he said, shrugging off his backpack. He managed a polite smile, but there was no widening of the eyes I had dreamed of. Instead, he fiddled with the zipper of his jacket, as though its brass teeth fascinated him more than the marble fountain or the frescoed ceiling above. I swept him into a tour, the library with its arched windows, the kitchen with its copper pots gleaming above the butcher block island, the master suite with its balcony overlooking the valley. At each stop, I paused for his reaction, but he nodded politely, then moved on, already planning his next question rather than absorbing the space itself. When we finally reached the courtyard, I gestured to the long table I'd set up for our first meal. "Dinner will be here," I said. His eyes flicked to the plastic folding chairs. "Is that it?" he asked. I laughed, inwardly chastising myself for forgetting proper seating. My excitement had blinded me to the details. Over bowls of steaming minestrone, Amelia complimented every nuance of the villa. "The stonework is exquisite," she said, running her hand along the cool surface of the fountain. Daniel sipped quietly, then changed the subject to his internship back in the city. I realized I had built this place for him, imagining laughter around the table, pictures by the fireplace, lazy weekends by the pool, yet he viewed it almost as an exhibit, something to be observed at a distance. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into managing the property's transformation from a construction site to a home. I installed a caretaker and met weekly with the gardener to discuss the rose bushes and the olive trees. I hired a violinist to perform a private evening concert in the grand hall, inviting friends and clients so they could marvel at the restoration. I hosted dinners for business prospects, arranging crystal glasses, polished silverware, and menus printed on thick parchment. Each event was a triumph. My colleagues spoke in hushed tones about the villa's charm, the quality of the renovation, and, by extension, my success. Yet every morning I'd wake in the suite overlooking the vineyards and feel the villa's vastness press in on me. The halls echoed underfoot, the rooms lay silent when no guests filled them. I realized I had built a masterpiece, but for whom? The phone calls from Daniel grew more infrequent, his visits shorter. He preferred to entertain friends in the guest house rather than live with me under the same roof, and Anna, his girlfriend, seemed more excited by the idea of hosting small brunches on the terrace than by spending quiet mornings together over coffee. I tried to bridge the gap. One Sunday, I invited Daniel to help me plant lavender along the garden's edge. We tilled soil side by side, the spade biting into the earth, and I told him stories about planting seedlings with my own father. He listened politely, then excused himself to take a call. Another time, I surprised him with a restored Vespa, his childhood mode of transportation, painted glossy red and parked in the garage. He smiled briefly, then rode off into the sunset with friends, leaving me standing amid ancient vines, late. At night, I wandered through the villa alone. I ran my hand across the polished banister, closed the heavy wooden shutters against the moonlight, and paused in the music room where the chandeliers still waited to be hung. The villa had become a symbol of everything I had achieved, and of everything I had neglected. In striving for perfection, I had built walls that now separated me from the sun I'd hoped to draw closer, and yet, as I walked the grounds under a sky streaked with stars, I reminded myself that every relationship requires tending, just like a garden. The villa stood ready, its doors open, its rooms prepared to be filled with laughter and life. It was I who needed to find my way back inside, to make this house truly feel like home for both of us. For now, the distance between my triumph and my family weighed heaviest, but I resolved that the next chapter of our lives would be one of reconciliation, where the echo of empty halls would at last be replaced by the warmth of shared moments. I was halfway through unpacking a box of antique books in the villa's library when my phone buzzed. The late afternoon light slanted through the arched windows, illuminating dust motes like tiny dancers in the air. I wiped my hands on a cloth and saw Daniel on the screen. My heart fluttered. He rarely called during the work week. With a deep breath, I swiped to answer. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice warm but hurried, like he was juggling more than he wanted to admit. I smiled, imagining him pacing a cramped office or leaning against a cubicle wall. "Hi, son. Everything okay?" There was a brief pause. "Actually, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." His tone was cautious, and I braced myself. "I'm all ears." The news of a wedding. He cleared his throat. "Anna and we're getting married." My breath caught. I leaned against the bookshelf, sending a line of leather-bound volumes quivering. I thought back to the quiet dinners they used to have in the guest house, Anna's laughter tinkling under the pergola. Of course they'd talked of it eventually. But in that moment, I felt a sting of surprise. I managed a steady sounding, "That's wonderful news." When did this happen?
Uh,
She said yes, after our trip to Rome last month. We weren't sure when to tell you. I pictured them at the Trevi fountain, coins tossed into the water, promises whispered under the Italian moon. My mind raced. Rings, venues, guest lists. And then I remembered the villa's sweeping courtyard and vine-draped pergola, my castle among the olives, where dreams of family celebrations had first taken root. The proposal. Daniel's next words tumbled out faster. Dad, Anna's parents don't have space for a big ceremony, and our apartment can't hold half the people we want to invite. We'd like to hold the reception at the villa. I laughed, part surprise, part delight. Of course. That would be perfect. We'll need to coordinate dates, caterers, all that. He hesitated. Actually, there's more. I was thinking, could you transfer the villa to me and Anna? As a wedding gift. Time slowed. The villa, my lifelong labor of love, the embodiment of every sacrifice I'd made, offered, simply, as a gift. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, pride that my son dreamed of making this place his home, fear at the thought of letting it go, and an unexpected twinge of sadness at the loss of what felt like the final chapter of my personal saga. Transfer it? I echoed.
yeah.
We love it here. We want to build our life here, Dad. Keep the traditions alive, olive harvest weekends, summer dinners under the pergola. You'd still be family, of course. We just think it makes sense. His voice trembled slightly, as if he anticipated my refusal. A father's inner turmoil. I sank into the nearest armchair, the leather cool against my palms. I pictured the dusty Formica table where I'd promised a better future to a laughing toddler. I remembered those early mornings in the diner, the hospital corridors at 3 a.m., the math formulas scrawled in the margins of my accounting textbook. All of it funneled into this villa, brick by brick, dream by dream. Could I truly hand it over? Wasn't it mine, ours, the last fortress against the struggles of our past? But wasn't that fortress built for Daniel? Wasn't its purpose to shelter him, to give him a foundation taller than any laughter of scorn? I closed my eyes and pictured him in his wedding suit, Anna in her gown, their guests milling through the sunlit corridors I had restored. I tasted the anticipation in the air, heard the laughter echoing off the stone walls. My hesitation wavered. Replaced by a swelling warmth. Son, I said, voice soft, you know I built this place for you. It's yours if you want it. His relief was palpable. Really? Dad, that means the world to us. Mapping the future over the next days, we drafted a plan. I met with my lawyer to discuss deed transfers and tax implications. We agreed that the villa would be gifted to Daniel and Anna, conditional upon preserving its heritage elements, the original beams, the terracotta floors, the olive groves, so that its character remained intact for future generations. We decided they would host an annual family harvest festival every September, ensuring the villa's role as a gathering place. I also negotiated with the caretaker to become their live-in estate manager, ensuring continuity in maintenance and an easy handoff. We drew up preliminary budgets for converting the small chapel into a music room for their first anniversary concert. And I set aside a fund for any structural emergencies, so that the villa would never slip back into neglect. Through each meeting and sketch diagram, I felt the villa shift from symbol of my solo triumph to emblem of our collective future. The ledger entries and property maps became threads weaving me back into a shared tapestry of family life. A gift, a legacy. On the eve of their wedding, Daniel and Anna invited me back to the courtyard. Lanterns swung overhead, olive branches brushing against wax tables set with white linen. They handed me the first glass of their celebratory wine, and I stood at the center, surrounded by close friends and relatives. Daniel raised his voice. To my father, who built more than a house. You built our home. He handed me a small framed photo, my hand first holding his, the worn stroller beside us, the old apartment building in the background. You made this possible, he said. Eyes glistening, I lifted my glass, my own voice thick. And you made it worth every moment. That night, as music drifted between the stone columns and laughter filled the air, I realized that the true gift wasn't the keys I would hand over, it was the legacy of perseverance, humility, and love embedded in every wall of the villa. In giving it to them, I wasn't losing my dream, I was sharing it, letting it grow and echo through the lives of my son and his wife, and through the generations yet to come. The morning after the wedding, the villa felt different, awash with the soft aftermath of celebration. Petals dotted the courtyard, champagne glasses still glinted on the long table, and a gentle hush settled over the olive groves. I slipped downstairs before dawn, breathing in the crisp air and letting the last of the lantern light fade from memory. The world seemed hushed, expectant. Passing the torch, I found Daniel on the terrace, wrapped in a shawl against the cool breeze, gazing across the valley as mist curled between the cypress trees. He didn't notice me at first, lost in his thoughts. When I cleared my throat, he turned, and for the first time I saw him not as my son, but as a man ready to step into his own. "I wanted some quiet before the day begins," he said, offering me the second chair. We sat together in silence, the villa's stone wings sheltering us. I thought of how many mornings I had awakened here alone, weighed by the echo of empty halls. Now, with Daniel at my side, those echoes felt like echoes of the past, soft reverberations in a home newly enlivened. Shared custody of dreams over coffee, we spoke of practicalities, the final deed transfer, the caretaker's new salary, the structural fund for emergencies. But our conversation drifted to lighter things, how Anna wanted to convert the old chapel into a yoga studio, how Daniel envisioned hosting writing retreats in the library, and how they planned to teach their future children to pick olives every autumn. Their excitement was contagious. I couldn't help but smile at the tapestry of ideas unfolding. "Dad," he said, stirring his cup, "thank you for trusting us with this place." I reached across the table, clasping his hand. "Thank you for making me see that some dreams grow stronger when they're shared." Reconciling distance that afternoon, I led a small tour for our extended family, grandparents, cousins, childhood friends, guiding them through the restored halls. As laughter echoed under the vaulted ceilings, I realized how much had changed. The distance I'd felt from my own family in pursuit of success had melted away. The villa was no longer just a symbol of the climb, it was a living reminder that triumph finds its fullest expression in connection. Amelia, standing beneath the frescoed archway, caught my eye and gave me a knowing smile. "He's made it his own," she whispered. I nodded, understanding that the daughter-in-law I once worried about had become a steward of my legacy, and my son had grown into a partner in that stewardship. Planting new roots in the late afternoon sun, we gathered olive saplings in the garden. Together, Daniel, Anna, and I dug holes beneath the ancient trees, placing young shoots that would one day bear fruit for our family banquets. As I patted soil around the first sapling, I felt the weight of decades of sacrifice lighten. Here was the proof that our past hardships would nourish the lives yet to unfold. Anna knelt beside me, brushing dirt from her hands. "It's perfect, Dad," she said softly. I smiled, realizing that this hands in the earth with my family was the fulfillment I had always craved. Looking forward as dusk fell, we returned to the courtyard for a quiet supper, simple bread, fresh cheese, and olives picked that very afternoon. The pergola was lit by a single string of lanterns, and for once, no grand events or meetings filled the calendar, only this moment of shared repose. Daniel raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he toasted. I lifted mine and looked around. At the faces glowing in lantern light, my son, his wife, my mother's gentle presence, friends who had watched our journey. "To new beginnings," I echoed, my voice steady. In that instant, I understood that the villa had never been merely a testament to my grit. It was a vessel for the love I poured into every late-night class, every extra shift, every painstaking restoration. By handing it to Daniel and Anna, I wasn't surrendering a dream, I was planting it in fertile soil, where it would bear fruit for generations. And as the lanterns flickered against the starlit sky, I felt a profound peace. The climb was complete, but the real journey, one of family, resilience, and shared hope, had only just begun.